I guess you liked it, huh?
I was saying before we started, I'll know within the first few minutes if this is a good crowd or not. This is a pretty good crowd,
It's
I
a
think.
good crowd. I stayed long enough to figure it out.
Yeah.
So my first time, I saw this at Sundance. It opened the film festival there. But I was with, 18, 20 members of my family. I was wondering how they're doing.
And 1,300 people.
1,300 people. I didn't really see it until tonight. Such a busy guy, and bless you too.
Bless you, Lord. Bless you.
I like it when you live it.
I mean, are you reliving all of this? Are you feeling elated? Are you feeling exhausted while you're watching all of this?
I was so knocked out by the art, just the way you told the story, the way you put it together. It's 100% the work of these two women. And the first thing that happens to me as a member of I'm a member of the audience. So I sit down and say, it's internal and eternal. Take me. That's the way I approach everything as a member of the audience. Take me. And my God, have I been taken.
How did you approach telling this amazing story? It would have been very easy to just do a straightaway chronology of his career, but you took a much more artistic approach.
Yeah, well, Rachel and I as co-directors, we hadn't done a biography before. It's not a genre that we enjoy to watch the genre, but it's not a genre that we've actually participated in as filmmakers. But we wanted to tell Norman's story. We wanted to be part of that very much. And so really it was, how do we approach the story? It's got such longitude, it's got such depth. And we didn't, any film that's only 90 minutes, of course, there's so much omission happening, we know that. But how do you maintain depth and also express Norman's personality in the confines of the film? And so we really had to go back to the drawing board artistically because it's not an observational film, because it's not cinema verite. And so we really had to sort of get to know Norman and really sort of think, what is our canvas? How do we tell this story with some whimsy and some depth and some feeling? And so we came up with the aesthetic that you see in the film. Something that Norman said to us early when we first met him was that he used to, in the tapings of All in the Family and the other shows, they were live, and he would sit in the back and he would see everybody do the belly laugh. It's also in Norman's book, Even This I Get to Experience. And he would watch everybody lean over in their seats when they have a big laugh like you did tonight. And he loved watching that. And that stuck in our head. We thought, what if we watch others watch themselves? Or what if we film others watching Norman's shows? Or film Norman watching his work? And that became a theme based on what you had said to us in an early interview. So we would take things that he would say, and he talked a lot about his childhood, and we felt like he had an alter ego, so we took some liberties and brought the 9-year-old child in. And so, but Norman also is someone who you might think, oh, well, he's a producer, so he's trying to be controlling of the project and all of that. He didn't have editorial control, and instead of us feeling paralyzed by what had happened if we did something strange or too artistic, he actually really encourages artistry and understands artists and the process. So we had a lot of freedom that you might think we wouldn't have artistically, just for trying new things.
Yeah. Norman, I just want to ask you some things that I think I learned watching the film. I've been such a huge fan, really, all of my life. I think, as we all have been, right? As John Stewart said,
they didn't use it, but what I said to John Stewart when he said you're racist, I said that we took you to bed every night. We went to bed with you.
That's why they call you a Hollywood liberal, because you say things like that.
I haven't realized your experience before All in the Family and all the legendary shows with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis and Martha Ray and Tennessee Ernie Ford and all these very kind of conventional shows for the time. When did your consciousness in comedy change so much? More of like social comedy as opposed to, you know, the more traditional that you had been working on prior?
You can't know how I love that question. Because it leads me to a story. It's in the book, but the crazy thing is I wondered about that myself. How did this come about? And then in researching as I was preparing the book and researching my life, I read about the very first Martin and Lewis, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis Comedy Hour. It came at a time when Hollywood, the major studios were afraid of television. And they had a giant campaign in theaters across the country. Movies are better than ever. Because they didn't want television to encroach on box office in theaters. Movies are better, that was everywhere. The very first episode, the very first show, the Colgate Company Hour that we wrote, the very first scene had Dean Martin managing a theater. Trying to remember her name, she was so hot. And she was a guest star on Marilyn Maxwell, was a guest star on the show. And she played an usherette. And Dean, and they were outside at the box office. They were outside on the street because nobody was in the theater. And they were trying to get passers-by into the theater. This was the sketch, the first sketch. Jerry came along, bouncing a ball. And their job was to try to get him in the theater, and he didn't want to go in the theater. When he finally went in the theater, oh my God, it was too dark, and he was alone, and he came running out, and it was hilarious. But I was upset afterwards. I remember sitting with my agent, David Susskind, some of you remember that name, complaining about how Jerry Lewis went off book and screwed up the sketch and so forth, so forth. What I discovered in reading the materials of that time as I was writing the book was that, because I had forgotten this totally, that the studios were so upset that they caused Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis to take out a full-page ad in Daily Variety apologizing for the sketch. It had done its job, and they were pissed. And they took out a full-page ad. So my long-winded answer to your question is, there was something on our minds from the very first,
right from the very beginning.
Right from the beginning.
I was going to ask you about working with Jerry Lewis. He's got kind of a reputation of being a little difficult to work with. The thing that we see in the movie was obviously a joke, but was he difficult to work with? The story that you just told kind of indicates that.
Jerry tells his own story. If you watch the muscular dystrophy telethons over the years. And they began with one Jerry Lewis, and they finished 30 years later with another Jerry Lewis. And you can't tell the story better than he tells it when you watch how he changed over the years. He was, when we started, as funny as a human being as I think could possibly happen on this planet. We used to, in his little playroom behind his house, we would say, Jerry, you're 62 years old and with one leg. You're 62 years, one leg, and you were born in Italy, raised in Switzerland. You have a fingernail that's bothering you. We would throw things at him and he would just, my God. So he gave me 30 years right there. I was 27, but I knew clearly I had 57, guaranteed from Jerry alone.
I have to ask about some of the characters, and I know we have just a limited time.
No, we don't.
But apparently I'm going to be going right from here right to the WGN Morning News tomorrow. You see me wearing these same clothes tomorrow. You have created some of the greatest characters ever in the history of television. Did you have any idea, right? Did you have any idea of the magnitude that you were creating? Or was it really just week to week you were just trying to turn out a show?
Well, first of all, mine was a giant collaboration. I didn't do any of this alone. You know, there were lots of writers and producers and directors, and God, they're talented. I mean, I think you have a little bit in here talking about when Carol O'Connor came in and read the script. He read a page, and I knew that was, if he would accept the role, that was Archie Bunker. Now, when you write a character, everybody here is capable of imagining this. You write a character, the words are on paper, and they're funny, and it's a character everybody's going to say, oh, that's good. So, but it's only when the actor, in this case Carol O'Connor, sits down and inhabits those words that this miracle occurs, and it was Archie Bunker. It's overwhelming. And the same thing with Edith, and the same thing. I made the pilot in 1968 for ABC. Didn't change a word. They had the right to ask me to make it a second time a year later before they lost their option. And they did, and I made it again. Same Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton, two different young people. And then when CBS wanted to do it, I said it has to be on the air. I'm not going to do another pilot. They put it on the air. But that was the first time Sally Struthers and Rob Reiner inhabited those two roles. So the best thing ABC could have done over the years. And they were adequate, and more than adequately, they were well played each time. But the miracle of, the chemistry between Archie and Edith and Michael and Gloria and Archie in every direction was, nobody's responsible for that but the fates, the heavens, whatever you believe in.
I think that Gene Stapleton was one of the most underrated actresses of all time. Afterwards, talk a little about that genius.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind was when the first time somebody asked me, what's Gene Stapleton like? I said, she's always where she is. And that stayed with me. The first thing I think of when I think of Gene is she was always where she was. I thought about that as I was sitting there listening to myself talking about I had 5 families on the air and 1 on Mooncrest Drive. And I wasn't there. Although I hate to be able to say I was. But, I was there sufficiently, we all got through, but Gene Stapleton taught me to be there. I'm here right now.
I heard an interview with Rob Reiner where he said that you were the first person ever to tell him that he was funny when he was a little boy. We saw the camaraderie between Mel Brooks and Carol Reiner and you.
My daughter Ellen and he are virtually the same age, to the month. And I had a cottage on Fire Island one summer, and Carl did too. We were about 30 feet from each other, and the kids knew each other, and they're 5, 6 years old. And Rob is on the floor with Ellen teaching her how to play jacks. And he was saying, no, that's not the way you're doing it. Pick up the ball. 6 years old, and he was making the sounds of the Jewish comics. I said to Carl, your kid is hilarious. But the father's usually the last one to know.